Hello, everyone. Yeah. Okay. Last 2 years of my life, I worked on the top floor of basically the relic of a building. This is an old flour mill. My old firm converted it into an architecture firm, and then there was a museum beneath. Basically, there was an explosion. The whole building disappeared instead of tearing it down. Next, background in set design, nightlife, entertainment, retail, and hospitality. And so these are just kind of, some examples. Denver Coliseum, worked on a remodel there. Red Rocks, Hard Rock Hotel on the bottom, just to kind of give you a quick overview of everything that I've been doing these last 15 years. I also do a lot of furniture design. Elevate is out of Minnesota. Supple is out of Denver. You actually have some Supple stuff downstairs. TMC, national company. Red Bull, everybody knows who Red Bull is. Beauty Bar in Denver. Anthropology, national, and then Honeywell. I actually worked on a think tank for Honeywell, and our schedule was increased for Barack Obama. Recently, I won a competition. I'm going to Nicaragua in 2 weeks for a furniture design project that I worked on for Izzy Plus. We're actually going to rebuild schools and playgrounds for kids. Started off in library design. My first library was Council Tree in Fort Collins, then Cherry Creek, Bear Valley. When I started, these are my first libraries I worked on, and my old boss at my old firm that you might know, he said there's no way you can put that piece of furniture in there because it's too contemporary, it's too progressive, and I said, no way, watch. One of the best libraries I worked on was in Walsenburg, where my grandfather actually went to high school. This is it was a high school, then a middle school. My father, who was actually in the room, actually completed all the flooring in there. And then my son and I and the whole family got to go to the grand opening. And this is in United Arab Emirates, which is in Al Ain. This is a master plan for a library on a 4,000-year-old road. The bottom images are basically keyframes from an animation that flies around the city. This is, I'll ask you, Urban Outfitters, Terrain, Anthropology, Free People, and Beholden. All those companies are owned by 2 people, and the headquarters are based here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the old Navy shipyard. The 2 images on the bottom are the interior. And it's kind of hard to see, but in the upper left hand, you can see where the old dry docks are. And this was the project I worked on at my old firm, Anthropology. This is their second headquarters. It's 120,000 square feet. The owner was very meticulous, and he didn't want us to attach anything permanent to the structure, so we had to be very sensitive. I love the image on the bottom right because no matter what you do to nature, it's going to come back. This is his house. When you have that much money, you can grow oranges inside your house. You can grow all your own food on your property. This is a several acre property in upstate Pennsylvania. It's kind of hard to see on the lower left. They have 400 cattle and sheep, and they make their own cheese. So back to my work, I like to take the data and change it into a diagram, just for not only for my use, but for the client's use, and just to kind of see where the opportunities are within that diagram and the data. And you can kind of point out, it's kind of hard to see the upper right image, but you can kind of see where there's kind of holes and gaps. And then pushing that forward and kind of getting more like the nerd alert kind of right now is use computer programming, Grasshopper and Rhino. And so it's kind of hard to see, but all those little yellow images are the sun throughout the year, and then using a little tiny skylight, melting away the architecture. So this is what it would be like in the inside. This is a 40,000 square foot library in Louisville, Kentucky. And then using those matrix to help design. The idea was that the carpet would all be the same color at certain parts of the day, but then as the sun would set, you would start to see the different gradients. And then all of that, I don't do that by myself. I work very well, and I enjoy working with other artists and collaborators. These guys are from Kentucky up on top. The flower, that's actual rendering for a furniture design competition that I worked on. Mondo, if you guys ever watch Project Runway, I worked on that article. And then Snake Pit. This is a bar in Denver, 13th Street. And so what happens when you find a bar like this with a creative background and background in construction, you basically beg and borrow the money and you buy it, right? You get a couple of your friends together, and then besides that, you get all of your friends to help you build it. And so I have a couple people that are in here in the audience, like Brandon and my father and my brother, and so it was just kind of like a family affair. There's me with a bandana, grinding away, and we worked on this for several months, and try to, it's kind of like the blood, sweat, and tears. And then he turned into the beauty bar, which is basically a jewel box. You can walk in and all the walls are sparkly, and we do a manicure martini happy hour for $10. The white part of that bar is from a salon in New Jersey. And then we did all the reupholstery locally in Pueblo. So Denver Startup Week was a few weeks ago, and I was asked to do one event. And instead of doing one event, I did 14 events. And I brought all these creative people together from Denver, 3 from out of state, 2 from Tijuana. And if you kind of see on the Friday, we talked about Rhino, which is in Denver, Eastside, and Pueblo, and Tijuana. And these guys are really inspirational. These are part of the people that I brought. They're looking at these old spaces in Tijuana that are basically forgotten about because all the media saying it's violent there. And they're saying, okay, we don't need tourism from San Diego to come in here. We have local tourism, and we have creative locals. Closer to home, East Side, I went to school across the street at Risley, or at the old Risley. I was the architect. Actually, I was in the visioning meeting years ago with Eva, and then timing worked out, and I was able to design the East Side Library in my old neighborhood. That's it.
Okay, so I was asked to talk about 60s interiors, specifically 1962 when The Help was written, or when it was set. So in the 50s and the 60s, pastels are huge, particularly lavender, buttercup yellow, mint green, but really the most popular are pink and aqua or turquoise. The colors of the 50s are really feminine and playful and exuberant, and around 1963, we start to see the colors switch over to what we consider more of 60s colors, like the avocado green, the harvest gold, orange, brown, etc. Anybody who had a mid-century home built probably can tell you they had a pastel bathroom or probably a pink bathroom. This type of bathroom is considered, or it's called Mamie Pink, and the reason is when Mamie Eisenhower was in the White House, she decorated so much of the White House in shades of pink that they started calling it the Pink Palace. In the 40s and 50s, metal cupboards were really popular because they're durable and they're easy to keep clean. But by the 60s, we're moving really over to wood cupboards. So this is an advertisement that shows them both mixed together. The bottom is metal, and then the top is changing over to wood. We start to see also wood cupboards really being like furniture in the home, and we see these open concept living spaces. The countertops get thinner. We lose the metal trim, which was popular in the 40s and the 50s. So this whole ranch-style home aesthetic is all about bringing in natural materials like wood and brick and stone and replacing it with things that were popular before that, like plastics and metals. And it's really about bringing nature into your home. Again, many mid-century homes had brick planters and these huge windows, and it's really just connecting your outside living space with the interior and really bringing nature in. The most popular homes that did this are the Eichler homes, and these are characterized usually by limited windows in the front of the house, obscured entryways, and then the back of the house is solid floor-to-ceiling windows, and there's a lot of times will be cinder block breezeways, swimming pools, but the idea is really just that you're connected with your outside space. So this is a 1962 ad for Formica, and again we see pink, pastels are huge. But also a design trend that was really happening is these scallops, and you'll see those a lot of times above cupboards, sometimes oven hoods, little valances above the windows. Here's another Formica advertisement. Boomerang was still the most popular pattern in 1962, but it's countertops, it's flooring, it's any surface that they want to be resilient, durable, washable, and to have some sort of decorative finish. So in the 50s, appliances are all about bigger is better. We have almost like dashboard consoles from cars. It's lots of chrome, it's lots of lights, very flashy. And by the 60s, it's really getting more compact, more streamlined, and more efficient. Of course, we still have pastel colors. And we also start to see a lot of oven wall units and then counter cooktops. And I believe it was in 1963 we come out with the flare oven, which is all one unit, but the cooktop actually pulls out in a drawer. And it's all about this really efficient use of space. And built-ins are huge, but everything, they want it to be really streamlined. So everything starts to be really futuristic in the 50s and the 60s. So fireplaces are really big. Almost everybody has a fireplace in their home, but now we start to see this sort of Jetsonian look. Everything is very futuristic. We have lights that look like spaceships. We're well into the atomic age. We start to see science and nature come into our decor aesthetic with things that look like molecules and starbursts and all these organic amoeba shapes that are really huge. There's this fascination with Sputnik and the space race, and the Cold War is heavy in our minds. Here we get into mid-century modern. All the furniture is very low slung to the floor. There's not any sort of extra ornamentation. It's just form follows function. There was a design guild that some of the most popular designers came out of, such as Eames and Bertoya and Saarinen, to name a few. And they really represent this whole mid-mod, futuristic look, this space-age modern that we're really seeing a lot of, and it was huge in the 60s. So along with those open living concepts that I talked about before, people, they wanted these really open design plans, but at the same time, they sort of wanted to box themselves in. So you start seeing these room dividers. You start seeing a lot of this sort of modular shelving, and Danish modern is in full swing by the early 60s. Another design element that you'll see a lot in public spaces like churches and schools and also homes is the Mondrian influence. And you'll look at the windows, it's very geometric and abstract. And he was a Danish painter, and his paintings were literally just boxes of primary colors. But you'll see his design influences everywhere in cupboards, whatever. So this, in the 1950s, paneling was really big, but especially knotty pine paneling. And by the 60s, we get into plateboard, which is still paneling, but now it's a man-made product, so it's more durable, it's cheaper. So, so we really get into lots of Polynesian influences, which I think started with our fascination after Pearl Harbor. And then it continues with surfer culture, and then by 1959, Hawaii becomes a state. And so we have full-on tiki culture, and especially in Southern California, many bars and restaurants that are this tiki theme. Oh, I'm done. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome you to the latest research presentation on the status of women and girls in Colorado. And the Statewide Women's Foundation was established 26 years ago with a mission to build resources and lead changes so that every woman and girl in Colorado achieves her full potential. Research forms the basis for all of our work, for projects to understand issues and challenges, and educational events like tonight to elevate female voices and inform the public. We focus on systemic change through public policy and legislative work to address issues that provide barriers to women and girls and make community investments with annual grant dollars. Strategic philanthropy increases our resources. Last latest research began in 2012 with a statewide listening tour to 10 different communities, including Pueblo, hearing from more than 300 females who helped us understand the challenges and barriers keeping them from reaching their full potential. Conversations helped us hone in on specific issues to partner with the Institute for the Women's Policy Research in Washington, D.C., collecting data from credible sources like the National Census, Centers for Health, state agencies, and organizations. The good news, the gender wage gap has shrunk. Women make up a larger portion of the state legislature. Both the girls' dropout rate and the teen birth rate has steadily dropped. Colorado women are relatively well educated. More women than men are employed in professional and managerial occupations such as computer specialists, financial advisors, architects, and psychologists. Persistent challenges put women in Colorado in a precarious position. The wage gap has narrowed, but women still earn substantially less than men, and there are more than 500,000 women who are poor or near poor. Despite gains in the state legislature, women are still underrepresented for our population, and there are stark geographic, racial, and ethnic disparities throughout the state. Based on conversations from our listening tour, we divided into 5 categories. The data included economic security, employment and earnings, educational opportunities, personal safety, and women's leadership. I will share some, and for a full copy of the research report, you can visit www.wfgo.org. 33% of women are poor or near poor, defined as between 100 and 200% of the federal poverty level. Poverty level for a family of 3 is about $19,000, and even at 200% of the poverty level, this works out to $38,000, a figure still well below the self-sufficiency standard in many state counties. Self-sufficiency is the amount of income a family of a specific size needs to meet their specific basic needs without relying on government supports. In Pueblo, a family of 3 would need to make $18 an hour to meet all of their family's needs without outside supports, translating to just over $38,000 a year. Median family income in Pueblo for women is $32,000, below this self-sufficiency standard. And the vulnerability of single mothers becomes even more apparent when compared to other family types. The lowest median annual income of any family type is for single mothers at just over $26,000 a year. There are just over 5,000 single mother households in the county, and an alarming 46% live below the poverty level. The single fathers, however, still make a substantially more than single mothers, and that is an issue that concerns the Women's Foundation. There's a clear connection between education and employment. Girls who are less successful in school are likely to have limited access to employment opportunities and more likely to live in poverty later in their lives. Girls with only a high school diploma earn less than $23,000 a year. Girls with a bachelor's degree earn $53,000 a year, and that's a $30,000 difference. Like poverty levels, educational attainment varies according to race and ethnicity. And this shows the percentage of women in Colorado with a bachelor's degree or higher. 41% of white women have a bachelor's degree or higher, and Latinas, the number is only 13%. As referenced earlier, there is some good news. The dropout rates have declined and have been doing so since 2004. The statewide dropout rate for girls is 2.8%. But those dropout rates shake out to almost 6,000 girls each year, a staggering number, not completing high school, to translate into lower earnings and a list of other risk factors. Reasons vary as to why girls drop out, different than boys' reasons. Research conducted by the Women's Foundation shows that girls are pulled out of school for caregiving and family responsibilities, and boys are often pushed out for behavioral issues. In Pueblo County, the dropout rate is slightly better than the rest of the state. However, in the 2010-2011 academic year, we lost 158 girls who dropped out of school. Personal safety also came up often in the listening tour, and the data in the report is very stark. Nearly a quarter of all women in Colorado have experienced rape, and almost half have experienced some sort of sexual violence other than rape. This is really fun, isn't it? Colorado rates are higher than the rest of the country. Women aged 20 to 24 are most vulnerable to this kind of violence and can start a chain of consequences that can affect a woman for her entire life. There is a significant cost to violence, both for the individual affected and for society as a whole, in lost days of work and medical care. The 4th chapter coming up is employment and earnings. This slide will show you that the wage gap as I mentioned earlier, we have made gains in Colorado since 1999, even faring better than the nation as a whole. However, there is still a significant gap, and at this rate, we will not close the wage gap completely until the year 2057. The cliff effect involves low-income women who receive child care subsidies, energy assistance, and children's public health insurance for their families while working or pursuing education. Because of a small raise in pay, women become ineligible for support, falling off a cliff so slightly more income puts them in a worse position than prior to their raise or promotion and leads women to turn down raises or promotions, preventing them from reaching self-sufficiency. In Colorado, we do have the highest percentage of women in the state legislature, 41 out of 100 seats, and unfortunately at the higher levels of elected officials, this is not the case. Of our 9 national congressional delegates, only 1 is a woman, and Colorado has never had a female governor. To learn more about the Women's Foundation, call me later.
I was asked to talk about the Chicano movement, and this is a mural by an artist from California. And there are many, many, many icons, historical figures in the Chicano movement. I will be talking probably about 12. And it was a social movement in the 60s that followed the example of Martin Luther King, and probably one of the least studied. And they fought for civil rights, human rights, and those who called themselves Chicanos took pride in their indigenous roots and denounced their Spanish roots. Beautiful art and poetry evolved. And I grew up Spanish American, so I had to swing the pendulum to Chicano and then find a balance. And there are many myths. Huitzilopochtli told the Aztecs to travel south from Mazatlan and settle in a place where they found an eagle perched on a cactus eating a snake, and they did 100 years later in 1325. A mixture of cultures. The Spanish had Santo Niño de Atocha. The Aztecs had their god, Quetzalcoatl. And I would love to have been there when Cortez and Moctezuma met, and their interpreter Malinche, who I talk about a lot. She's one of my favorite characters in history. And there were many reasons why the Spanish won the battle. They were lucky, and they had guns, disease, unfortunately. And these are paintings by Andrew Velez before the battle, during the battle, and then during conquest. They're beautiful paintings. Andrew's from Colorado Springs. And this is a beautiful story. Tonantzin was a goddess of the Aztecs, and the Spanish burned her temple. 10 years later, after the conquest, the Virgen de Guadalupe appeared to Juan Diego and wanted a church built where the temple had been, and he took it to the bishop, and she allowed roses to grow, and they appeared on his cloak, and they built a church after her. Of course, the Chicano movement was about Mestizaje, the Spanish father and the Indian mother. These are beautiful paintings by Emmanuel Martinez and Arlette Lucero. And of course, we have symbols of resistance. The eagle is Cesar Chavez's union. The grito, the Chicano power, the brown berets, the martyrs, 9 martyrs. And Freddie Rodriguez's collection is on 3rd floor with all the buttons, all the symbols of resistance. And Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez was one of the leaders. He was here at Mineral Palace Park in 1969. He fought for education, employment, many things. He wrote I Am Joaquin, an epic poem that everybody should read because it talks about Mexican history all rolled into one epic poem. And here are some of the words. Yo soy Joaquin, perdido en un mundo de confusión. I am Joaquin, lost in a world of confusion, caught up in the whirl of a gringo society. That was pretty tough at that time to bring out a word, gringo. And he ends it very, very well, very positive. I shall endure, I will endure. But it's a beautiful poem that everybody should look at. Lalo, I am going to read this as far as I can. Stupid America, see that Chicano with a big knife on his steady hand? He doesn't want to knife you, he wants to sit on a bench and carve Christ figures, but you won't let him. Stupid America, hear that Chicano shouting curses on the street, he is a poet. And since he cannot write, he will explode. Stupid America, remember that Chicano. And he ends up that, he has a painting in his mind. Let him do this and let him be educated, because the students were really quitting school. The moratorium of August 20, 1970, Ruben Salazar was killed, by tear gas projectile. There were 30,000 demonstrators, and it was a very sad time that really led partly to the decline of the Chicano movement. My favorite character, of course, is Cesar Chavez, who led the Farm Workers Union, and he walked with many people 300 miles from Delano to Sacramento, and by 1970, they did get starting better benefits, and $1 an hour didn't do it for those poor migrants. Dolores Huerta cannot be forgotten. She was right by his side. Here she is with Obama, President Obama, and Cesar Chavez's wife, Helen. She's an amazing woman that's still alive. She's about 80 now, I believe. And Huelga, of course, being strike. And Cesar Chavez, when social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person that has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. And this is the people he was fighting for: children in the field, women, the elderly. He believed in Gandhi's nonviolence philosophy. He fasted for 25 days to get rights for the farm workers. He lost 35 pounds. Support from Robert F. Kennedy, out of respect for one of the heroic figures of our time, is what he said, is why he was there. The cortito was a short-handled hoe that was legal to use. And the short-handled hoe, of course, you get the weeds a little better, but you also hurt your back. And in 1968, they started to fight for it, and when they got it banned, Cesar Chavez said that was the greatest moment in history. And we do have an example of the cortito in a third floor exhibit. Who else would get be on Time magazine and have a stamp of him? All my life, I've been driven by one dream, one goal, one vision: to overthrow a farm labor system in this nation that treats farm workers as if they were not important human beings. Farm workers are not agricultural implements. They are not beasts of burden to be used. And of course, I want to market our Chicano mural on second floor, if you haven't seen it. It was done by David Garcia from Denver, based on a book written by Dr. Sandoval called Spanish-Mexican Legacy of Latinos in Pueblo County, for sale for $20 in Amazon. I think Maria Tucker will be glad to take your money. And this, I'm not going to say anything about. It's fuerza, strength in numbers. Thank you.
Hello. This is my first presentation presenting something not coffee related, so stick with me for a second. 3D printers. They're all the rage, and I just want to be a part of this somehow. You're hearing about it in the news, you're seeing it used for art projects in architecture, science, you're using it for space. This group of professors from Michigan Tech actually all used one 3D printer to print parts for all these other ones. In reality, these printers are using these humans to reproduce. So, just think about it that way. I'm not sure if I want to be part of that, but I started to think about the fact maybe I am, in some strange way, qualified to make 3D printers. It's a lot like making a coffee roaster, just more like a small robot that makes stuff. Instead of a large robot that extrudes coffee, it extrudes plastic or some material to put parts together, but it has motors and parts. And I was also looking at items that I think are fascinating, and this is just a collection of stuff that I've collected, and they're metal objects. I love detail in metal, little metal figures, the design in some of these old-fashioned radios that are solid metal, just the feel of metal stuff in your hand. Specifically, I love complicated metal stuff. And it's something that isn't available to be 3D printed easily yet, because most 3D printers just print with plastic or resin or any of these other less hard materials. And then I discovered precious metal clay. This is a material that has been coming into vogue in the world of jewelry. And you can work it in your hand like clay, so it's soft.
you can wet it and dilute it, and then you can dry it and you can fire it in a kiln, and it becomes, lo and behold, a solid metal object. So I was thinking, hey, this is a great idea. What if I can make a 3D printer that instead of using plastic, extrudes this material that right now is only part of the jewelry industry and bring it into the 3D printing industry? Maybe I have a niche or a corner. So here's precious metal clay plus a maker bot. So I got really excited. This is so flippin' exciting. I've got the metal clay printer. I can make things that apply to industrial design. Industry can use it. We can make jewelry directly by printing it instead of going through the lost wax process. I can make machine parts like gears. I can make frameworks for robot heads, whatever. And then once the excitement subsided a little bit, I was able to rein it in and say, all signs point to this machine actually being very small because the clay is expensive. I want a lot of detail. It shouldn't be something huge that prints washing machine size stuff. It should make wash parts. So I decided to call it the Mini Metal Maker. And I started drawing some designs for how to make the Mini Metal Maker. And I'm thinking about where to put the motors, how to shape this machine so it can be, bite size and hold all the parts needed to shape clay into three-dimensional objects. There's a syringe at the bottom that maybe squeezes the clay. Then I went to 3D. I'm using Lightwave 3D, and I started using this free program called Blender. That's pretty awesome. Ridiculously hard to use, making me pull my hair out. But and I settled on a design that has a little tray in the bottom that moves left and right and up and down. And then Maria Kramer at the library helped me use the library's 3D printer to print some parts to make my printer. And I also sent away to a place called Shapeways that could make higher detail parts for way more money. I actually like using the library way more for this kind of stuff. But so I got the parts and essentially brought them home. I was able to slide the stepper motors in, and because they were printed in 3D, there were very few parts to actually put together. Most of the work was done beforehand just in designing it. So stick the motors in, screw it all together, and after about 4 months of work and problems and a few attempts, here's my little 3D printer. It's 14 inches tall. It's made out of, thank you. Thank you very much. It's made out of wood and plastic and metal and screws, and I spray painted it in the backyard. So it looks a lot nicer than it really is. This is just the prototype. And then the electronics. How the heck do you make it work? Well, I just used the same electronics prescribed by the researchers that make the RepRap. It's all open source technology, so I just bought an Arduino, which is not a dirty word. It's a small open source computer, and use firmware that's available open source. I actually ended up using all of this in one big chain to make this thing work the first time. You call it a tool chain. It's ridiculously complicated because it's all pieced and scrapped together. I'm working with a programmer now. We're going to make it into one program instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then I made a gear in Lightwave. I sliced it up in a program called Slicer, spelled like dead mouse, but it's Slicer, and then made a little gear. And it's a little gear made out of bronze clay. So when it's fired, drum roll please, gears! They're actual gears. They're made out of metal. They're not clay, they're not plastic. These are actual gears. Under a microscope, that's a ballpoint pen turning them. They're really tiny and they work. Those are watch gears. Yeah. So Lindsay's always wondering why I'm jumping around, screaming with excitement in the workshop. And then I made a bunch of other things. I made a little salamander. I made some little decorative keyhole covers, for a little box. I made an escapement latch, is the kind of thing a little latch goes back and forth, and this thing turns one tooth at a time, so I could print you the insides of a grandfather clock. And I'm going to launch it on Indiegogo to try to raise some money to actually turn this thing into a real product that you can go buy, because I can't just make them for free in the basement. I made this one for some, but so find me afterwards and sign up my list. Thank you.
So I am the assistant director and the lead developer of the Children of Ludlow exhibit at El Pueblo History Museum. I am also the co-chair of the Ludlow Centennial Commemoration Commission, which is a statewide commission designated by the governor of our state. It is the 100-year anniversary of the Colorado Coalfield War and the Ludlow Massacre. I'm going to give you a little context here. At the time, 100 years ago, Colorado was the most dangerous state for coal mining. And by most dangerous, I mean 3 to 4 times the number of deaths as any other state in the Union. Colorado also had a thirst for coal. Coal consumption grew dramatically at this time. So it was dangerous, but people really wanted it. To put it in perspective, right now the average U.S. citizen consumes 3.5 tons of coal each year. But at this time, it was 12 tons of coal each year. Mules did a lot of the work, as well as men and boys, but mules had more value. Quite often, miners would say that their lives were not as valuable as a mule to the company. People were paid not in money, but in scrip. This is company scrip, and of course, it could only be used at the company store. Miners lived in company homes and company towns, so every aspect of their life was controlled by the company. And so, for all these reasons, miners went on strike in 1913. They called for a strike, and it was September 23rd, 1913. There were 7 reasons that they went on strike, but they all related to safety, recognition of the union, and better wages. When they went on strike, families were evicted from those same company-owned homes. Since they lived in the company homes and were no longer working for the company kicked them out. And so families took all their best belongings and went to the open prairies and erected tent colonies. Here is the Ludlow tent colony. You will see there are a number of tents. You will also see that it's very snowy and muddy. And people are living in canvas. And so it's a very vulnerable environment. Also at the Ludlow tent colony, I love this picture because it really demonstrates the multitude of ethnicities that were living at Ludlow. There were over 20 different ethnicities and nearly as many different languages in the Ludlow tent colony. However, people found a way to work together and work in solidarity. And one of the reasons they did was because of baseball. Music and baseball were 2 of the elements that really united the miners while they lived in these pretty crazy conditions. Miners played baseball with one another. It was an American sport that unified them regardless of their ethnicity. And this is the kind of thing they had to unify against. This is the Death Special, which was a regular car outfitted at CF&I with metal plates and a machine gun and a fog light. And Baldwin Felts detective agents would drive through the tent colonies and randomly shoot gunfire. Here's the other thing that families faced. Not only were they vulnerable to violence, but they were very vulnerable to weather. This was one of the worst winters on record. Tents would collapse. Remember, people were living in canvas. Random bullets and horrible snow. Here is the National Guard. The National Guard came into the Ludlow tent colony as a way to neutralize violence in October of 1913. The miners and their families actually welcomed the National Guard. They thought they would make them safer. And things were better at the time. By the time of the Ludlow Massacre in April of 1914, you have a very different force. The National Guard men had mostly gone home, and what you have is General John Chase overseeing an army of paid mercenaries, and they were paid by the money of Denver businessmen. Here's one of our heroes of the story, Mother Jones. She helped to urge miners to go on strike in 1913, and here she is in February of 1914 on a march through the streets of Trinidad with children and women. This was the Children and Women's March. This is the Zanitel family. They were at the Forbes tent colony, which was near Ludlow, and this was the only tent that was saved. We tell this story in the exhibit, but they burned the entire tent except for this single tent of Emma and Joseph Zanitel. To get the whole story, you can come see the exhibit. This is the aftermath of the Ludlow massacre, and that happened on April 20th, 1914. 12 children died. 11 of them died in a black hole, very similar to this. They suffocated in a cellar with 2 women after militia set fire to the tents. This is Frank Schneider. He's one of the kids who was shot during the Ludlow massacre. And so children and women died. There were also 3 Union members who were executed by militia, and their bodies were left on the train tracks. And a little bit of the aftermath. These are the refugees of the Ludlow tent colony after the massacre. And federal troops come in on April 28th to bring an end to the violence that occurred after all of these deaths. And one of the reasons the troops came in is 1,000 club women in Denver marched on Denver asking for Woodrow Wilson to send those troops in. And I urge you to get the rest of the story to come down to the museum and check out the exhibit.
I was asked to talk about the downtown area, and I thought one of the best ways to do this would be, people ask me, what do I do? And Susan said I'm the owner of Kaduya Gallery, the Shoe Factory, the Artery. I'm actually Director of Creative Solutions for Rocky Mountain Vein Institute, so it's a lot of titles. But I'm all about connecting the dots. And if you look at our footprint, since I do a lot in the arts, we have this fabulous creative corridor. It's about 1 mile long, and it connects Mesa Junction, the Union area, with the downtown area. And so I'm going to focus on the downtown area. What we've done as the creative corridor is actually given each respective area their own region. And this was how we narrowed it down. And if you think of, we call it the grid, 1 to 5, it really is 1st Street to 5th Street, and then Santa Fe to Court Street. So we identified all of the key players, all of the major businesses, all of the arts, and the Artery is actually the alleyways that were created back in the footprint in the late 1800s. We have these fabulous alleys, and again, trying to use the arts to drive economic redevelopment, we thought, why don't we just start with the alleys, the arteries? So we have an east-west and a north-south artery. The big part of this was getting the American Heart Association to designate this as a national walking path, and that was the first thing that we did. So it is actually 0.67 miles, it's part art, part history, and it basically starts at Bingo Burger, goes through Central Plaza, up to across the street from the Marriott, up to 5th Street, and does a big loop. These are some of the images. This is the north-south artery, looking at it from 1st Street all the way up to 5th Street, which is actually this very dramatic electric corridor, which had already lots of remnants in it. It's the infrastructure that's already built. So there wasn't this need to go in and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to create this new destination. This is the east-west artery right going into Central Plaza. And again, it's walkable, it's livable. And if you look at what's happening throughout not just the United States, but around the world, people are returning to the downtown areas, but they're looking for livable, walkable areas. Now, one part of the artery was, how do we make it a destination? How can we pull this CF&I, this steel legacy, and really borrow from that? These are actually, we've submitted a grant to the NEA to develop these about 4-story steel sculptures that borrow from this legacy. And we wanted them to be the human form in motion. So you'll be able to see these, actually, you can see them from I-25 actually, at different points along the artery. So the goal again is, one, to create this canvas for artists, and also to create placemaking. And so using this historical legacy of, say, for example, CF&I, for those of you that visited the Shoe Factory recently, we're starting to bring a lot of artifacts out of CF&I and really show this creative element. a big part of the artery right now. Also, I'll get into urban fiction. This is at Central Plaza. And again, it's borrowing from Kadia Gallery is actually the historic Tutt building, which was built by Spencer Penrose and Charles Tutt and Spencer Penrose, who built the Broadmoor Hotel. And in the 1890s, when they made their fortune in Cripple Creek in mining, they opened this up as their Pueblo office. So taking those, these are different placemaking. So Lady Tutt, and then on the artery, we've got the murals. So this is a sample of what Sage Art Academy did this summer as one of their mural camps. So again, trying to connect the artists with the community, children were able to create these types of murals. This is the Blue Sky mural, which was an RFP that went out to a series of artists, and Mike Strachino and Matt Taylor won that and actually created this. This is during its development, so you can kind of see what the building looked like beforehand for those of you that have never seen it. And then this is what I think Pueblo really owns and is very, very unique, and museums around the world are trying to define this convergence of fine art and street art. This is an exhibition that we did earlier in the year where Mike Strachino actually painted the murals inside the gallery on the walls, and then fine art was hung next to it. So again, it was a way for us to try to tell this story of this convergence. Creative industries. This is a really difficult word that we're trying to reinvent, because oftentimes you think creative industries, it's an art gallery or it has something to do with art, but actually it's much more than that. The art shop is one example. The shoe factory is another example. This is Gallery 201, which is located above Clark's Western store. It's the whole second floor. There are 8 artist studios there, and the mission of the shoe factory is really to connect the artists with the community. For example, the artery is really an experiential process. You really can't buy a mural. But if you like the style, or if you like what that artist is doing, then you can actually connect with them. You can actually go to their studio at the shoe factory, or if their studio is somewhere else in Pueblo. It's about connecting the artists with the community, connecting the dots. This is another one of the studios that's actually in the shoe factory. Another experiment that we're doing in the downtown is in the historic Federal Building. For those of you that went to this, it was a preview of a world premiere, The Spirit of Detroit, and we took over 19,000 square feet of the historic Federal Building at 5th and Main, the old post office. And we had video installations, we had performance art, a lot of different things. I chose Solaros because in our area, this is another example of a creative industry. Recently, I was asked to attend a summit for all the creative districts in the state of Colorado, and one of the questions came up is, what is a creative industry? And these are some of the fascinating and fun things that Pueblo is really becoming a thought leader in, is really taking it to the next level. I think the presentation that David did is a perfect example of how we are really taking creativity to a whole other level. So really it's about connecting the artists with business and using that as an economic redevelopment. And connecting the dots, this shot basically Mesa Junction, Union, all the way back to downtown. So there we go.